Hi, Erik Linask here at AstroCon 2010. We're heading into the third day of this year's event, and I'm talking now with Mark Sommer, who is the co-founder and Chief Innovation Officer at Invenio. Also, I wanted to take this opportunity to talk to Mark right before his keynote address this morning at AstroCon. So, Mark, welcome. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me here. I appreciate it.
And we'll get you out of here with plenty of time to get upstairs for your keynote.
Perfect.
So, you know, one of the things that you're really big on is using open source to increase communications capabilities, really in underserved and those rural areas that otherwise may not have capabilities. Why open source?
Often commercial carriers will be very hesitant to go into those areas. They feel a rural area is not dense enough from the population, especially in poor rural areas. People don't have money to pay for services as readily as in an urban area, so they feel the business proposition is not working for them. But communication is so key for many services: education, healthcare, government services, all those kind of things. Without good broadband communication these days don't work well. This is really the opportunity for appropriate open source solutions to, on a grassroots level, create the infrastructure large carriers can't and don't want to create. So cost effectiveness and appropriateness of the solutions really allows to go to those areas, provide communication that's broadband data, but as well voice over IP and phone communication, and then build upon that as the density of users grow. More and more commercial providers start looking at the area, but open source is still really relevant even as densities grow.
So basically, companies like yours are able to leverage more cost-effective technologies to sort of get the ball rolling in those areas.
Absolutely, and we involve local IT entrepreneurs in that work, so they create a business out of this for them, employ local people, skill up their employees, and really take ownership of those solutions. We couldn't do this without open source solutions out there, from the wireless field, where we use things like OpenWRT and various wireless distributions and such, all the way to voice over IP solutions like Asterisk, which are really key to get low-cost communications going, or communications at all in many areas.
So on a local level, how much expertise is required in terms of developing some of these capabilities, in addition to what you're doing?
You're hitting right down on one of sort of the sore spots when people think about open source, of how complicated might it be, how much pre-knowledge do you need to have to really effectively use those. And today I'll talk about that a little bit, and a little bit my call to action will be to make it even easier than it is, because we're dealing a lot with users which have much less previous experience than we have here, like at this conference. It is already pretty easy, but it still can always be easier, and it should always be done in a way that it's really easy to adopt locally.
And I guess that's one of the great things about open source is even if you don't necessarily have the expertise to address one particular area, there are lots of people, and we see them all over the show here, who probably already have. Absolutely,
and there's a great community to tap into as soon as you have access to communications, as soon as you have access to internet communications. You can tap into user groups and things. One thing to think about maybe is to create specific user groups for users from these underserved rural areas, because their applications and their questions might be a little different than a user who uses, say, Asterisk in a large VoIP company or things like that.
Right. Let's get a little more specific. You've recently started an initiative specifically down in Haiti. Tell me a little bit about that.
Sure. A little bit background to that: we were looking at doing potentially work in Haiti end of last year, and we're supposed to go to Haiti for some initial meetings with partners there in the week of December 12th when the earthquake happened. So obviously we had a strong connection at that point already. We had talked to a lot of people using technology, entrepreneurs and such, and we felt if we can provide any support and help at that point, we would be happy to. And within 24 hours we got calls from NGOs on the ground saying communication is a huge problem, and it will become much worse as more and more people come in the relief effort. Satellite systems will be jammed. There are just too many users in a too tight area, and IP broadband technologies could really provide relief for all the logistics works which happens behind the scenes, to get the food to the right places, to get shelter to the right places, to get rubble removal coordinated, to do rescue operations, get medical teams in place and communicate between them back and the NGO's local headquarters, but as well international headquarters. So what we did is within 4 days we got the equipment together and got on a relief flight to Haiti with a small team and set in Port-au-Prince a wireless broadband network up. Within 7 days we had, I believe, around 10, 15 organizations covered. Within 2 weeks we had about 25 locations served with high-speed broadband internet connectivity, which they used for all these logistical needs, but as well for outreach. A lot of interviews you may have seen on BBC, CNN and so forth were actually delivered over this network using technologies like Skype and others to get video and voice interviews done in real time. And the key for those NGOs was that we came to the table with a solution which we knew would work, and we had the expertise to install it really fast. That's something a single NGO can't do by themselves effectively, and typically they just focus on themselves. What we focused on is serving the whole community of relief organizations as much as we could.
So what's the role of open source technologies in being able to get something like that set up as quickly as you did?
The role ultimately is that we use products which under the hood use a lot of open source technologies which are very appropriate and very low cost. So we could do this at a cost factor which would have been prohibitive for other traditional technologies. We were able to do with a few $1,000s much more than people may have been able to do with $1 million or more. So the fast turnaround, the appropriateness is really, really important in those environments.
So really what you're saying is something that the folks at Digium have been promoting for quite some time, is that open source, and Asterisk in particular, is as good an alternative as the other proprietary solutions out there, except for the fact that it's much more cost effective. Absolutely.
I think, probably different solutions have different niches where they're great in. Asterisk as a technology is immensely versatile. So you can have it from a simple PBX type system all the way to sophisticated IVR systems and so forth. And that's the beauty of it, that it can do all those things at the same time as well. In this case as well, we relied a lot on other open source projects out there, OpenWRT I mentioned, and backend solutions which ran the whole network and supported the network, OpenNMS, a network management system. Of course, this usual things like Squid and all the Linux things under the hood we used as well heavily. So it was impressive that we could do this on very small boxes in terms of their computing power. So it's easy to support. The less machinery I have to support, the less power I draw, the easier it is to get up and running in an environment where you have no power, you have very little resources to support your systems afterwards. It needs to be all very effective. We were able to do that pretty effectively, so we're excited that worked.
So now you got the wireless network up and running in 4 days. What happens after that?
Typically, we are not a relief organization, so we're not typically an organization which goes into emergencies. In this case, it was really appropriate, the technologies we use in general. And what we're looking forward now, doing in Haiti, started that already and we'll be building that out over the next few months, is really increasing broadband connectivity in rural areas. So areas outside of the capital of Port-au-Prince typically don't have access to good ISPs, affordable voice over IP coverage, things like healthcare centers, education, NGOs and their operations, but as well it stimulates local business. If you want to start a small local business and trade effectively, may it be grains or other products out of your region, you need to communicate with your buyers and suppliers and so forth. And if you can't do this, you're forced to move in these capitals, and that's really, really problematic. They're overcrowded, it's a really tough environment to live for families, it's often dangerous. Rural areas have so much opportunity, and communication is a key to make those rural areas be viable for businesses, and we care about that hugely, and we're very excited to start that work across Haiti in a pretty significant way.
And are you looking now then at using Haiti just as a model and continuing to build that experience in other rural and underserved areas?
We have done similar work already in other sub-Saharan countries, but not on a scale as we are going to do this in Haiti. So we're very excited to have the opportunity to take this up a notch in a place which really can benefit from this, having great partners there. And then we will replicate that absolutely across other areas which can use it. And our goal is always to put these technologies in place and hand them off to local entrepreneurs so they can run them sustainably. They become part of the local fabric of business and infrastructure, and we can move on to help other places. Again, this is our plan in Haiti. Within about 1 year we will have that work completed and hand these networks over. ISPs will be able to use them, small IT entrepreneurs all across the board.
What kind of network speeds are you able to get with your technology?
We're using long-distance Wi-Fi point-to-point connections, so you're looking at 802.11n speeds of 40, 50, 60 megabits and more potentially. Typically in most of these places in Haiti is the same. Internet connectivity is actually fairly costly. Sometimes it's because of technology limitations, satellite and such. Other times it's often regulatory issues. In this case I think it's more of a regulatory challenge in Haiti. So typically end users use about 1 to 2 megabits of connectivity. We can easily serve that in rural areas. But we will have high-speed connectivity in the country as well. For example, video conferencing of a healthcare facility back to a main hospital in Port-au-Prince. Get the expert in, like in the current cholera outbreak there. Getting communication from the areas which are affected back to the areas where the experts are and out of the country is so key, and to do this rapidly. And without connectivity it's very hard. Just to do it with cell phones or satellite-based phones, you miss out on a whole part of the communication. Being able to do video conferencing, conference calling ad hoc is really key to have an immediate response and as well to build business.
Excellent. I want to make sure you get up to your keynote in time. I've been talking here at AstraCon 2010 with Mark Sommer. Mark, thanks again for joining me, and best of luck with the initiative in Haiti and elsewhere.
Thanks so much for having us here, and looking forward to the keynote now. Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks.